Well, hello, I have been doing a big project of planting, total of 55, but only 28 at my house, 27 at mom's house, new Techni arborvitae trees. Now, I have these out by the road because they are a sound barrier, which you're gonna hear why I need that very soon. They're also, do you hear the sound? They're also a wind barrier, so I don't get southerly winds just beating on the house, dust barrier. They're all those things, privacy. And so it took me a while to find the ones I wanted, but they're large, bald, and burlap trees. What that means is bald, B-A-L-L-E-D, and burlapped. Literally, it has burlap around the root ball. So these are field grown trees, as opposed to when you go to a garden center and you find trees in containers, plastic containers. These are grown in the ground, so they get much larger. They're much heavier. So a normal homeowner doesn't usually love planting these because they're cumbersome to move around. I have a skid loader from the farm that I use to move them because they're so heavy I can only roll them into place once they're close by. But what we're doing today is talking about planting. So I recently had a video on amending, and that will come into play a little bit. But what I've been doing is planting them. So the first big thing, since I have a whole row of them, was making sure they're in line. So I had a string line going from one end, it's about 180 feet one way, and then to this end. And I would mark every so often how many trees I wanted. The whole area is about 190 feet, but from here on it was about 180. So to do that, I used a foot meter. They're simple, they're cheap, you can buy them on, anywhere online. And it means it tells you how many feet are going as it's rolling along. So I was planting these on 7-foot centers. And as I go along, I just take my meter, and once it gets to that 7-foot mark, I know I can stop. And I would, right there it is, and I can just take a little bit of spray paint, and this is nothing major, but what that's doing is telling me that's where I want a hole. And I have 3 trees left to plant. And you would think that doesn't sound like a feat, but let me tell you something. I had big dreams when I got these and thinking it was gonna not be a problem. It's not that it was a problem, but that's because it ended up that I had a little bit of a God save in there, a little bit of a great moment where I didn't have to dig all the holes by hand like I thought I was gonna have to. Now, one of these trees, as you can see, it's gonna end right up here in this flower bed I have here. So that's gonna give me great privacy screening from the corner of these trees all the way down the line. Now, before you dig anything, don't just assume you can dig. There's sometimes, even for me out in the country, there's things underground that you don't want to hit. So for me, I had to call in locates. You can do this, it's a free service that comes out and locates any issues. If you're in cities, this is really important too. So I got these little flakes put in my yard because all I have going through here are some underground water line for the rural water, it's called. And you can see it's quite a ways from where I was planting, which made me feel very comfortable and confident. If you're just gonna plant a small tree, if you're gonna put a new flower bed, call it in just so you don't have to worry. You want to know so you don't end up hitting someone's internet line. You know how mad we're all gonna get if we don't have internet. We feel lost and we feel isolated. It's not good. Now, for this whole row, I did not do what I'm gonna do right now, which is what? Hand dig. Now, I have hand dug before. Last year I planted, I think 18 roughly bald and burlap trees like this, and I hand dug each one. It's possible, it's doable, we can do hard things, but I did have the help of an auger. Now, I took video footage of it because I wanted you to see what an auger is. An auger that I used was a 30-inch auger because I have 24-inch root balls on my tree. So the 30-inch auger was big enough that when it had a big hole, I was able to have these beautiful big holes that I could just roll the tree into, and it was just this big space that was perfect for planting a tree, and that's what I loved. Now, if you don't have an auger, there's no issue with hand digging. It just takes a little bit more time, and you can see here, I'm pretty lucky in that I have pretty loamy, nice soil. So this soil started pretty dry, but in the last couple weeks, we've been getting some nice rains, and that has made it much easier to be able to dig. So do you see when I'm digging this out, look at the beautiful soil that's underneath. If you don't feel, like if you feel like you've been in a drought too, like I have been all summer, water your area a few days before and saturate it well a few times. As that soaks in, it will loosen up your soil, make it much easier to work in, much easier to till, much easier to dig a hole, whatever it is. So I have 3 holes here to dig. Why not? And then we'll talk about actual planting. As a homeowner, you may never purchase a bald and burlap tree. Usually these are planted only by professionals, installed by professionals. I wanted to save money, so I'm doing my own, but I wanted to show you what the process is when you do it at home alone. I do not like keeping the wires or the burlap on. So that means I start by taking off part of the bottom wire. So this top wire is going to help it keep a good shape of a root ball. You don't want the root ball to fall completely apart. That can be stressful on the tree. So instead what I take is a nice cutters and I cut around that wire. So there's a basket of wire that's keeping that. You can see it just keeps the burlap here in shape. And so what we want to do is cut around that so then we can pull off this wire around the bottom. So to get that off easier, then I make a couple cuts just so I can open up the wire basket itself, which you can see once you make those cuts, you can just do that. And now what I'm gonna do is roll the tree into the hole. I see one cut I forgot to make. So we're gonna cut that off. And now what we can do when we roll it, because the reason we're rolling it, by the way, you're gonna notice how I get out of breath. This is why homeowners don't usually do this. These are heavy. We're talking hundreds of pounds often, and you want it well watered, which it is, which guess what, makes it heavier. So I'm gonna roll this into there with the burlap on because you want it to stay together, and then I'll position it as needed. So you can kind of coax it in once it's in there. Now you're gonna say, Caleb, that's high. I like to plant things high to begin with, yes. But when you spade a tree out of the ground like this is, it furrows dirt up around that root crown, the root flare itself. And so there's more soil sitting up on top of this, and it's actually looking higher than it is. So the soil level is more like it here. So now what I do is I remove the rest of this wire basket before I remove the burlap. So I've cut all of the twine up here that's keeping it together. And now I can cut the rest of the basket off. And now you can see, look how easy that just pulls out all around. And now we can talk about the burlap. So some people, some installers, some people actually keep the wire baskets on. I don't like that in my soil. I don't like that impeding on the roots. I have my dog here that wants to play. Instead, what I do is I make sure to take off all the burlap. So they will put it together by nails. You don't want these nails in your soil. So I will take them out one by one. It's kind of like needles holding together something when you're making, you know, some type of seamstress work. And what I'm gonna do is take all these out, and then what we'll do is open up the burlap. Now, if it is all natural burlap, there is an argument that you can keep it in the soil because it will naturally disintegrate into the soil. I just don't like to trust that. I still think over time it could impede certain roots. It could do certain things that you just don't want it to. So I do try to remove it all. Now, how I do that once it's in the hole, which seems hard, is I take a knife and I cut up one side of it. So when I do that, you can see here, I'm just cutting it in half, and I'm gonna continue to cut it. That's gonna allow me then to hopefully slowly take it out from both two sides of the tree. So I continue to just rock the tree slightly over so I can keep cutting in half, and then eventually I will just work it out around the tree. So as I work the tree, and I can just hopefully get the burlap by lifting the tree, now all the burlap is gone, and you can see the root ball itself is together. So what I always think of first is, what am I going to feed this tree with? I don't like synthetic fertilizers, I don't like chemicals, but what I do love is a good biotone, because what it does is, and you can just tell by the smell, it's a good organic material in the sense that it smells very earthy and organic. But what I do is I just follow the instructions and I put this right around the roots first before I do any amendment, before anything. And it just so happens that measuring is great in a pint jar because you know how many cups it is, 2 cups. So I can put this all around the root ball. Now this is a big root ball, so it's taking a decent amount of the biotone. And what biotone does is it gives the roots the good bacteria. Think of it like your gut. It gives your roots your good bacteria to get them really started off healthy and excited to work into that soil, which is what I want. I want them really excited to get acclimated to the soil. So once I have that in there, which is down here, now just like a normal tree, you may remember on normal trees, I like to make sure I find the root flare. Now, when they dig this out of the soil and they spade it out of the ground, some of the dirt gets furrowed up on top. I like to still remove that. Do you see how this easily just starts breaking off up here? And it's exposing now the root flare. And what the root flare is where a tree, where its trunk goes out laterally into the roots. And you can see it down in here. You can start seeing the roots. And instead of being scared of those, if you look down in here, do you see those right there? Those are just little capillary ones on top, but you don't want to bury that below soil level. That's why it always looks like I plant trees high. It's better to plant them slightly high, because if you plant them too deep, they get inundated with water, they suffocate because they can't breathe, so their roots can girdle over time and choke themselves. So it's really good to make sure they're above ground. I just like to expose it even a little bit more. So now what I do is, I do work in a little bit of an amendment. I have beautiful soil, don't get me wrong. It's beautiful, it's black, but it doesn't mean it always has tons of nutrients. So I'm gonna just add in some good just organic compost. You know, if I don't have my own, because I do go through compost a lot, so I buy a good organic compost because that works well. So I then like to think about mixing about 50% of my native soil with the compost. So I work the soil back in with the compost, mix it together as I'm adding it back around the tree. So I'm gonna do this one, do my other two, and then we'll come back together and I'll have all the trees planted, which is, believe me, a good thing. So now that the trees are all planted, I'm taking off. When they get shipped, especially when they're balled and burlap, they're usually tied up. And that just helps so they ship tighter, they ship better. It keeps them from breaking actually. So I'm taking all that off because it was easier to plant them with the twine on. But now, slowly over time and with some water and some acclimation, they'll open up and be full. But let's talk about Dripline because I get a lot of questions on Dripline and it's actually super easy, so come here. So Dripline is just honestly really inexpensive tubing, usually around a 1/2 inch. And you set your drips wherever you want them, called emitters. Now, when I'm doing it, I'm using these plastic, and they will just like help keep it in place, plastic stakes. Now, to do these, let me show you the emitters here. So these are the emitters. These ones happen to be red, which you can see nicely. And they emit different amounts of water, usually measured in per gallon amounts. So like these are 2 gallon an hour. So once I get this all set up, every hour, each tree, if I have it on, should be getting 2 gallons of water. So to put these in, and you can buy this at any store anymore, it's very easy to buy. You wanna get it right on your root ball. So obviously it's pretty easy right now to see, but they make little, you can use a little nail if you want to too, but this is a small little punching tool that will make a hole right in the drip line. And so what I usually do is I set, where's my actual line gonna stand? And then I sit here and I make a poke, and then I have to just work this in and make a nice hole. So once I have that hole punched, I just take my emitter, and it has a pointy end, and you just stick that right in that hole, and you kind of have to push it until it locks in place, and you just twist it slightly. And then every 7 feet, I'll put one of these emitters. I'll set it right at where I want it at the root ball. I'll take my stake, and I'll just set my stake right with it. And that will help this hold in place and not move. Now you're gonna say it's unsightly. Yeah, it is kind of, but one, it waters easily for you, so it's okay. But two, I'll put mulch now over all this, all along this bed eventually, and that will make it look better. So since you're making your own tubing, let me show you here. At the end, it's even more easy. You buy ends for them. You can't get any easier. So the one end at the other side, I'll put a stopping end. So this just stops water. It's a plug. Water will go up to it, be stopped, and it'll create pressure all throughout the emitters. That will help so it emits them. At the end where I want to put a hose into it, it has a hose end. So you just take this on this type, and each brand is a little bit different, but you screw this side on until it's tight, and then you know that it's a good flush, secure bond. And now this is my end, and that's all it is. So drip line like this is super easy. I'll put emitters at each one. I'll stake it here at the end. I can come up now and hook a hose up, and I can water, at this house, 28 trees at one time. So I'll leave it on for 1, 2 hours, however many. These are large trees, so I want them to have quite a few gallons of water. So I'll probably water them, 3 or more hours at a time. But balled and burlap trees like this hold on to moisture really well. Now I know this whole time you're having like, Caleb, aren't there high lines I'm seeing above you? There are. One, the camera angle makes them look a little closer under the trees than they are. The trees aren't directly under them. But two, they're measured correctly, and these are trees that don't grow as tall as some, so I'm not worried about the high lines. But always check that, and check with your local companies to see what your regulations are too. So what do I hope you do with this? I always want to wrap up at some video that seems like, what's the takeaway here? The takeaway is one that, even if we're not used to it, planting a tree, we can all do. If you've never done it, it's doable, whether it's a big balled and burlap tree or a smaller tree that you can easily get at any garden center, it's doable. And a few steps in, whether it's amending or getting biotone to help the tree get going, they make a huge difference in the lifelong success of a tree. They start small, but eventually these trees, even for the next generation, will have a lifetime upon generations of shade and of beauty, and that's what's important. So get planting, put a tree in, believe me, the future will say thank you. And until next time, I'm gonna get my water set up so these can get a drink.